October 1912. The Serbian-Romanian border. 23 soldiers stationed above an abandoned village where something impossible was happening. Every night, church bells rang in empty streets. Every morning, graves were found opened from within. When command ordered them to investigate, they discovered that some enemies cannot be killed with bullets, and some hunts never end. This is the sealed military report they tried to bury. If you want to hear more stories that history tried to hide, subscribe now. This is what they found in Groblje. The regimental commander confirmed the reports in his official dispatch to Belgrade. 12 separate patrol logs, all describing the same sounds from across the valley. Church bells ringing in a village that had been empty for 3 years. Then a sentry went missing, and they stopped calling it superstition. My name is Nikola Petrović, sergeant in the Royal Serbian Army, and in the autumn of 1912, I was assigned to the border garrison at Negotin, where the Danube bends between Serbian and Romanian territory. I had served 6 years, survived 2 campaigns, and thought I understood the difference between a soldier's imagination and genuine threat. The checkpoint we manned sat on a limestone ridge overlooking the river valley, watching for Romanian troop movements as the Balkan Wars churned around us. We were 23 men in a stone fortification built by the Austrians half a century before, living on black bread and bean soup, waiting for orders that never seemed to arrive on time. The village below us was called Groblje, which means cemetery, though whether it was named for the dead or became one I never learned. 3 years earlier, the entire population had abandoned their homes within a single week. No fire, no plague, no invading army. The official explanation was economic migration, families seeking work in the cities. But the regional priest told a different story when he came to bless our garrison. He said the villagers had been hearing things at night, finding their livestock torn apart in ways that made no sense, discovering that certain graves would not stay closed no matter how much earth was piled on them. When the headman's daughter was found dead in the church with her throat opened and her blood gone, the exodus began. We could see Groblje from our position. 30 stone houses arranged around a church with a copper-green dome, surrounded by terraced fields returning to wild grass. The cemetery spread up the hillside behind the church, its iron crosses visible even from our ridge. On clear mornings, when the mist burned off the valley, you could see that some of the houses still had shutters on their windows, still had cooking pots sitting outside their doors, as if the inhabitants had simply paused their lives and walked away, intending to return. But they had not returned, and we had been ordered not to patrol there. Captain Dimitrov, our commanding officer, had made this explicitly clear during our first briefing. "Your duty is the river crossing and the Romanian side," he said, his mustache twitching the way it did when he was uncomfortable. "The village is abandoned. There is nothing there requiring military attention. You will not waste ammunition or time investigating civilian matters." He did not explain why an empty village qualified as a civilian matter, or why he kept his binoculars trained on it for hours each evening as the sun set. I shared a bunk room with 5 other non-commissioned officers in the garrison's 2nd floor, where the wind came through gaps in the stone and made the oil lamps flicker. Emil Kovac bunked across from me, a Hungarian conscript with steady hands and a farmer's practical skepticism about anything that could not be shot or plowed. Stefan Ionescu was 2 beds down, a Romanian-speaking private from Timișoara, who had been assigned to us as a translator and guide. In the evenings, after the watch rotations were set, we would sit on our bunks cleaning rifles and talking about what we would do when the war ended and they sent us home. The bells started on the 3rd night of October. I was on watch with Kovac, manning the southern observation post that looked directly down into the valley. The night was cold enough to turn our breath to fog, and a 3/4 moon threw enough light to see the village below as a collection of dark shapes against darker fields. It was 2 hours past midnight when Kovac grabbed my arm and pointed. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. At first, I heard only what I had been hearing for days. The river moving over stones, wind in the empty houses, the occasional crack of settling timber. Then I caught it. Church bells, distant and irregular, ringing not with the measured rhythm of a call to prayer, but in confused, overlapping tones, as if someone was pulling the ropes without pattern or purpose. "There is no one in that village," I said, more to myself than to Kovac. "Then who is ringing the bells?" he asked. We watched for 20 minutes, trying to pinpoint the source, but the valley played tricks with sound. Sometimes the bells seemed to come from the church, sometimes from the cemetery hill, sometimes from the darkness beyond the village where the forest began. Twice they stopped completely, and we thought it was over. Then they would start again, louder, more insistent, as if whoever was ringing them was growing impatient. When our watch ended at 4 a.m, I reported it to the officer of the day. He made a note in the log and told me to get some sleep. "Probably wind," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Metal banging against metal in an empty bell tower." But that night, 4 other sentries reported the same sounds. By the end of the week, it was happening every night. Always between midnight and dawn. Always the same confused ringing, always stopping just before first light. The men began to talk. Ionescu said his grandmother had told him stories about strigoi, the Romanian word for the undead, those who had died badly and could not rest. Kovac said he had heard of similar things in the Hungarian borderlands, villages that had to be abandoned because something had gotten into the cemetery and would not leave. I told them both to focus on their duties and stop spreading peasant folklore. But privately, I began watching the village more carefully. On the night of October 9th, I took the midnight watch with Ionescu. The temperature had dropped, and frost was forming on the stones of our observation post. The moon was down, and the valley was darker than I had seen it. Just the faint suggestions of structures against the lesser darkness of open ground. We stood in silence for an hour, listening to the night, and then Ionescu touched my shoulder. "The cemetery," he said quietly. "Look at the cemetery." I raised my binoculars and focused on the hillside behind the church. Even in the darkness, I could see that something was wrong. The ground between the grave markers looked disturbed, dark patches against the frost-pale grass, as if earth had been recently turned. Several of the iron crosses were tilted or fallen, though they had been upright the day before. "Someone has been digging," Ionescu said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the tension beneath it. "In multiple locations, fresh soil, recent." "Animals," I said. "Foxes looking for—" "That is not fox work," he interrupted. "Look at the volume of earth. Look at the distribution. Those are excavations, Sergeant. Someone has opened those graves." I wanted to argue with him, but the evidence was clear even from a kilometer away. Something or someone had been working in that cemetery, and recently enough that we should have seen them. We had been watching that valley for 2 weeks, and no one had approached the village during daylight, which meant the work had been done at night, in the darkness, by someone who did not want to be observed, or by something that could not work in daylight. I pushed that thought away and focused on practical matters. "We reported in the morning," I said. "Let the captain decide what action to take." But before morning came, the situation changed. At 3:17 by my pocket watch, Private Miloš Tešić left his post at the western observation point to relieve himself. Standard procedure was to inform your partner and walk 20 meters to the designated area behind the fortification. Tešić told his partner he would be back in 2 minutes. He never returned. The alarm was raised at 3:30 when his partner came looking for him. We found the designated area empty, found his rifle leaning against the wall where he had left it, found no signs of struggle or disturbance. We searched every meter of the garrison, every room and corridor and storage space. We searched the ridge around our position, calling his name into the darkness, expecting to find him injured or disoriented. What we found was a trail. Boot prints in the frost, leading from behind the fortification down the ridge toward the valley. Tešić's boots. I recognized the pattern from the morning formation when I had told him to repair his sole. The trail was clear for 50 meters, and then it stopped at the edge of the limestone cliff that dropped 15 meters to the valley floor. Not stopped as if he had turned back, stopped as if he had continued over the edge. We roped down at first light and found him at the base of the cliff, his neck broken, his eyes open and reflecting the dawn sky. His hands were scraped raw as if he had been clawing at stone, and his uniform was torn. But what made Kovac cross himself and Ionescu begin whispering a prayer in Romanian was the expression on Tešić's face. Not pain or fear or surprise, but something else. Something that looked almost like recognition, as if in the last moment before he died, he had seen someone he knew. And when we searched his pockets for identification and personal effects, we found earth under his fingernails. Dark earth that smelled of clay and roots and something older than either. Cemetery earth. Tešić was buried in the military section of the Negotin town cemetery, 8 kilometers from our position. 6 of us were granted leave to attend the funeral. Myself, Kovac, Ionescu, and 3 others who had served with him. The priest was young, barely 20, and stumbled over the words of the service as if he had not yet memorized them properly. Tešić's mother was there, a small woman in black who did not cry, but stared at the coffin with an expression of profound confusion, as if she could not understand how her son had ended up in a box in the ground. After the service, as we were preparing to return to the garrison, an old woman approached me. She was not family. I could tell by the way Tešić's mother avoided looking at her. She wore the traditional dress of the border villages, layers of dark wool and embroidered aprons, and she smelled of wood smoke and herbs. "You are from the garrison above Groblje," she said, not a question. "We are," I replied, wondering how she knew. "Then you have heard the bells." She leaned closer, and I saw that her eyes were milky with cataracts, but her gaze was sharp and focused. "And you have seen the graves moving." I said nothing. Admitting we had observed suspicious activity in an abandoned village was not appropriate conversation with a civilian. "My sister lived in Groblje," the old woman continued, "before the evacuation. She was the one who prepared bodies for burial, washed them, dressed them, sat with them until the priest arrived. She told me that in the final months before they left, the bodies began to change after death. Not rot, not decay. Change. Their fingernails would grow, their hair would darken. And if you were alone with them at night, you could hear them breathing." "Old mother," I said carefully, Your grief is making you speak of impossible things. My sister kept records, she said, ignoring me. Dates, names, descriptions. She gave them to the priest before she fled. He sealed them away because he did not want the church to know what was happening in his parish. But I know what she wrote. I know about the Vasic family, mother, father, 3 children, all buried within 2 weeks of each other in the winter of 1909. And I know that their graves were the first ones to open. She pressed something into my hand, a small bundle wrapped in cloth, tied with red thread. Garlic, wormwood, and salt blessed by a proper priest, not that boy who buried your friend. Keep it in your pocket when the sun goes down. And listen to me, Sergeant. The dead in Groblje are not at rest. They have not been at rest for 3 years. And now that your friend has joined them in the earth, they will be hungry for more. Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of mourners with surprising speed for someone her age. Kovac, who had been standing close enough to hear, looked at the bundle in my hand. Are you going to keep that? Of course not, I said. It is peasant superstition. But I did not throw it away. I put it in my left breast pocket, where it made a small weight against my chest, and told myself it was simply out of respect for the woman's concern. That night, the bells rang louder than ever before. The sound was so clear and insistent that Captain Dimitrov himself came to the observation post at 2 in the morning, binoculars in hand, and watched the valley in silence for nearly an hour. The bells were not random this time. They were ringing in a pattern, almost like a call, rising and falling with a rhythm that suggested purpose rather than chaos. How long has this been happening? The captain asked. Every night since we arrived, sir, I reported. But never this loud, never this organized. And the cemetery? Significantly more disturbed than yesterday, sir. I count at least 8 graves that show fresh excavation. The church doors are open. I can see them from here. They were closed last week. The captain lowered his binoculars and turned to face me. His expression was difficult to read in the lamplight, but I saw something there I had never seen before in 6 years of service under him. Uncertainty bordering on fear. Sergeant Petrović, he said quietly, I am going to tell you something that is not in any official report. The reason we were assigned to this garrison, the reason our orders specifically prohibit patrols into Groblje, is that 2 previous units requested emergency transfers after being stationed here. The first unit reported psychological disturbances among the men. Nightmares, paranoia, 1 suicide. The second unit reported actual contact. Contact with whom, sir? Not whom. What? He paused, choosing his words carefully. Their final dispatch, before they were relieved, stated that they had engaged an intruder near the cemetery. They fired multiple rounds at close range. All shots struck the target. They found blood, they found tissue. But the target did not fall. It retreated into the cemetery and disappeared into an open grave. When they investigated the grave the following morning, they found no body, no blood, nothing but disturbed earth and a smell they described as rot and copper and something else we cannot name. I felt the small bundle in my breast pocket suddenly seem heavier. Why were we not informed of this before our deployment, sir? Because command believes the previous units were suffering from collective delusion brought on by isolation and stress. Because admitting that 2 full platoons of trained soldiers were frightened away by an empty village would be embarrassing to the regiment. Because in 1912, sergeants, the Royal Serbian Army does not officially acknowledge the existence of the supernatural. He turned back to watch the valley. But off the record, between you and me, I am beginning to question that policy. The bells suddenly stopped, leaving a silence so complete it felt aggressive, as if the night itself was holding its breath. "Double the watch tonight," the captain said. "No one goes anywhere alone. No one approaches the cliff edge. And if anyone sees movement in that valley, any movement at all, they are to report it immediately, but not, under any circumstances, to fire unless directly threatened." "Understood, sir." "And Sergeant?" He looked at me directly. "Whatever that old woman gave you at the funeral, keep it close." So he had seen. Or perhaps he was simply acknowledging what we were all beginning to believe, that the rules we thought governed the world were not as firm as we had been taught, and that there were threats a rifle could not stop. The attack came 3 nights later. Ionescu and I were on the midnight watch at the southern post, the position with the clearest view of Groblje. The night was overcast, and a light rain had started to fall, turning the valley below into a blur of shadows and mist. The bells had been ringing for an hour, that same purposeful rhythm, and then they had stopped, leaving only the sound of rain on stone. We stood in silence, listening, watching. The darkness below us was complete, without even starlight to soften it. I was about to suggest we light the observation lamp when Ionescu grabbed my arm with enough force to bruise. "There," he whispered, his voice tight with something beyond fear. "On the path. Coming up from the village." I saw it then. Movement in the darkness, pale against the black, climbing the ridge toward our position. Not the uncertain movement of someone navigating difficult terrain in low light, but smooth, continuous, impossibly fast. As it drew closer, I could see it was man-shaped. But the proportions were wrong. The limbs too long, the movement too fluid, as if the joints bent in places they should not. And it was coming directly toward us. "Sound the alarm," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Now." Ionescu ran for the bell while I raised my rifle, sighting on the approaching figure. It was close enough now that I should have been able to see details, clothing, features, equipment. But there was only that pale shape in the darkness, moving with unnatural speed, and now I could hear it. A sound like wet earth sliding, like something heavy being dragged through mud, like breathing that came from a chest that should not be breathing at all. I fired. The report of the rifle was deafening in the confined space of the observation post. I saw the muzzle flash illuminate the figure for a split second. Pale skin, dark clothing, a face that was almost human, but not quite. Eyes that reflected the light like an animal's. The bullet struck center mass. I know it did. I have made that shot 1,000 times in training and twice in combat. The figure did not fall. It did not even slow. It kept climbing, and now it was close enough that I could smell it. Earth and decay, and something underneath that was worse than either. Something that made my throat close and my hands shake as I worked the bolt on my rifle and fired again, and again, and again. Behind me, the alarm bell was ringing, and I could hear boots on stone as the garrison came awake. But the figure was nearly at the wall now, moving up the sheer face of our fortification as if the vertical surface was merely an inconvenience. I saw its hands, too pale, fingers too long, reach for the top of the wall. And then it stopped. It hung there, just below the wall's edge, and for the first time it made a sound that was not breathing or movement. It spoke. One word, in Serbian, in a voice like stones grinding together. hungry. Then it dropped, falling 20 meters to the rocky ground below. And when I looked down, I saw it land on its feet, saw it look up at me with those reflecting eyes, saw it smile with too many teeth. And then it turned and ran back down the ridge toward the Groblje, moving so fast it was gone from sight within seconds, leaving nothing behind but boot prints in the mud that were too large and too deep to have been made by any living man. When the captain and the others reached my position, I was still standing at the wall, rifle empty, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. "Did you hit it?" the captain asked. "5 times, sir," I said. "Center mass. It did not even bleed." We found the bullet impacts in the morning, deep gouges in the limestone of the ridge, right where the figure had been standing. All 5 rounds had passed completely through the target and struck stone, which meant whatever I had been shooting at was less solid than human flesh. Or the bullets were passing through something that did not register damage the way living tissue did. Either option was impossible. Either option was true. Captain Dimitrov sent an emergency dispatch to regimental command at dawn, requesting immediate reinforcements and permission to abandon the garrison. The response arrived 3 days later, denied on both counts. The regional commander's opinion was that we were experiencing harassment from Romanian infiltrators attempting to undermine Serbian morale, and that abandoning a strategic position due to unsubstantiated fears would be a court-martial offense. We were ordered to maintain our post and cease filing reports of a fantastical nature. So we were alone, and we were not believed. And whatever was in Groblje knew we were here. The men began to crack. Not openly, we were professional soldiers, but in small ways that accumulated. Kovac stopped sleeping more than an hour at a time. Ionescu began carrying a crucifix that had belonged to his grandmother, kissing it before every watch rotation. 3 men requested transfer to the front lines, preferring Bulgarian artillery to another night watching the valley. The captain denied the requests, but I could see in his face that he understood their reasoning. On the 8th night after the attack on our wall, we made a decision. Or rather, the captain made it for us. He assembled the entire garrison in the main hall at sunset, all 23 of us, standing at attention in the lamplight, while rain hammered the roof above. The captain stood before us in full uniform, his service revolver on his hip. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who has abandoned hope of survival and decided to face death on his own terms. "Gentlemen," he said, "we have been ordered to hold this position against an enemy our commanders do not believe exists. We have watched, we have defended, we have reported, and we have been told we are cowards or madmen or liars. Very well, if command will not act, then we will act ourselves. Tonight, we go into Groblje. We will investigate the cemetery, determine what is happening there, and put an end to it. This is not an official military operation. Anyone who refuses this order will face no disciplinary action. But I tell you now, if we do nothing, we will die here, one by one, pulled from our walls by something that should not exist. I would rather die fighting than wait to be taken in the darkness." No one refused. We prepared as if for combat. Rifles loaded with double ammunition, bayonets fixed, each man carrying a torch soaked in pitch. The captain divided us into 3 squads of 7, with orders to stay within sight of each other at all times. First squad would investigate the church, second squad the cemetery, third squad would maintain a defensive perimeter. I was assigned to second squad, along with Kovac and Ionescu. We left the garrison at midnight. descending the ridge in tactical formation, rifles ready, every sense heightened to the point of pain. The rain had stopped, but the ground was soft and treacherous, and the darkness was absolute. We lit our torches only when we reached the village edge, and the sudden light revealed Groblje in all its abandonment. Houses with collapsed roofs, streets choked with weeds, the church looming above it all with its copper dome turned green with age. The smell hit us immediately. Not the clean decay of autumn leaves or the sharp rot of dead animals, but something else. Something that made my eyes water and my stomach heave. Sweet and corrupt, like meat left too long in summer heat, mixed with the mineral smell of disturbed earth and something underneath that I still cannot name. It was the smell of wrong, of violation, of things that should be buried staying above ground. First squad moved toward the church while we climbed the hill to the cemetery. The iron gate had been torn from its hinges and lay rusted in the grass. Beyond it, rows of graves stretched up the hillside, many of them open, their markers tilted or fallen. The earth between them was churned and disturbed, as if something large had been moving back and forth repeatedly, wearing paths through the grass. Kovac counted 13 open graves. Ionescu checked the markers and confirmed what the old woman at the funeral had told me. The Vasic family, all 5 members, their graves excavated down to the coffins. And the coffins were empty, not broken or damaged, but opened from within, the lids pushed aside and the interiors scraped and clawed as if the occupants had fought their way out. "This is not grave robbery," Kovac said quietly, his torch illuminating the interior of one coffin. "Thieves take. They do not dig up, open carefully, and leave everything behind except the body. Unless the body is what they came for," Ionescu said. That was when we heard the screaming from the church. Not the battle cry of soldiers in combat, but pure animal terror, the sound of men confronting something their minds could not process. We ran down the hill, abandoning tactical formation, 3rd squad converging with us as we burst through the church doors into a scene that I still see when I close my eyes. The interior was lit by the torches of 1st squad, throwing wild shadows across walls painted with fading icons of saints and martyrs. 4 men were backing toward the altar, rifles raised, firing at something that moved in the shadows near the entrance to the crypt. The other 3 men of 1st squad were down, not dead, but crawling, screaming, their legs torn and bleeding, dragging themselves across the floors, leaving dark trails. And in the crypt entrance stood what had once been a man. It was tall, too tall. The spine curved wrong, the neck extended in a way that suggested broken bones healed incorrectly. Its skin was the color of clay, pulled tight over the skull, and its eyes were not the dead eyes of a corpse, but alert, intelligent, aware. It wore the remains of clothing, a farmer's shirt, wool trousers, rotted and stained, but still recognizable, and its mouth was open, showing teeth that were too long, too sharp, grown past human proportions into something designed for tearing. It looked at us as we entered, turned its head with a bird-like quickness, and smiled. Then it moved. I have seen men move fast in combat, the desperate speed of soldiers under fire, the trained efficiency of veterans in close quarters. This was different. This was speed that violated physics, that existed in one place and then another, without the space between. It crossed the church in what seemed like a single bound, struck the nearest man with enough force to break bones, and was back in the shadows before we could even aim. "Fire!" the captain shouted, and we fired, all of us. A ragged volley that filled the church with noise and smoke and the smell of gunpowder. I saw bullets strike the thing, saw cloth tear, saw pale skin split. But there was no blood, just a dark fluid that looked more like earth than anything that should flow in veins. It screamed then, a sound that was rage and hunger and something else. Something that might have been words in a language humans had forgotten. And then it was among us, moving faster than thought, striking with hands that ended in nails grown long and hard as iron. I felt it pass close enough to tear my uniform sleeve, felt the cold that radiated from it, like winter air from a tomb. Kovač stabbed it with his bayonet, driving the blade deep into what should have been its back. The thing turned, looked at him with those too aware eyes, and pulled itself off the blade as casually as a man removing a splinter. Then it grabbed Kovač by the throat and lifted him off his feet with one hand, holding him up as if he weighed nothing. I did the only thing I could think of. I reached into my breast pocket, grabbed the bundle the old woman had given me, tore it open, and threw the contents directly into the thing's face. The effect was immediate and violent. The creature dropped Kovač and recoiled, clawing at its face, that earth-dark fluid pouring from its eyes and mouth. It made a sound like metal scraping stone, stumbled backward, and fell. We didn't wait to see if it would rise. The captain ordered withdrawal. We dragged our wounded toward the door, maintaining suppressing fire on the crypt entrance where more shapes were beginning to emerge. We made it out of the church, across the village square, and were halfway up the ridge when we looked back and saw them. Not one, but 7 pale figures standing in the church doorway, watching us retreat with those reflecting eyes. They didn't pursue. They simply stood there, patient as stones, as if they knew we would return eventually, as if they had all the time in the world. We reached the garrison as dawn broke, carrying 3 men with torn legs and 1 with a crushed shoulder. Kovač was alive but barely conscious, the bruising on his throat already black. The captain's uniform was soaked with blood not his own, and his hands shook as he helped lower the wounded onto their bunks. We had lost no one, but we had learned something worse. We could not win. The dispatch to regimental command was brief. Captain Dimitrov wrote in clear, factual language. Unit engaged hostile force in Groblje village. Enemy demonstrated extreme aggression and resistance to conventional weapons. Sustained casualties. Request immediate relief and specialized support. Recommend village be designated restricted zone and razed to foundation. The response came 3 days later. The garrison was to be abandoned. Not because command believed us, but because the Balkan Wars were intensifying and our position was no longer strategically necessary. We were being redeployed to the southern front, where we would face Bulgarian artillery and Ottoman cavalry. Enemies that could be killed with bullets, enemies that made sense. We left on October 28th, 1912. Every man, every weapon, every record. We left nothing behind except the fortification itself, empty and dark on its ridge above the valley. As we marched away, I looked back one final time. The village lay quiet in the morning light, houses and church and cemetery all still and ordinary under the autumn sun. You could almost believe it was just an abandoned village, victim of bad luck. You could almost forget what walked there after dark. But I haven't forgotten. 30 years have passed, and I have not forgotten the sound of those bells, or the smell of that cemetery, or the feeling of being hunted by something that should not exist. The old woman's bundle saved Kovač's life, and possibly all of ours. But I don't know if it killed the thing or simply drove it back. I don't know if they are still there, waiting in Groblje, or if they have spread to other villages, other cemeteries, other places where the dead are not at rest. I only know this. The military report was sealed and classified, labeled as evidence of mass psychological trauma brought on by wartime stress. The village was never razed. The cemetery was never sanctified. And if you search the archives carefully enough, you will find a notice from 1915 stating that the border garrison above Groblje was permanently closed due to structural instability. They are still there. I know they are. Waiting in the darkness below that empty ridge, ringing their bells, calling to whatever might hear them. And sometimes, late at night when sleep will not come, I wonder if they remember me. If they remember the taste of garlic and wormwood and blessed salt. If they are hungry still,